Hi, friends. Raylon's in London. I'm in Minnesota. This is very exciting.
Sorry, I'm just gonna put you here for a sec. Um,
I love this angle, actually, especially because it doesn't have your face. I think that's very meta. Kidding. I love you. I miss your face already.
it's true. Okay, I'm just gonna put you here for now. All right.
Perfect.
Where is the line
You tell me. Between dance and fight.
between the Yangqin and the keyboard?
Between you and me.
It's right here. That's where the line is.
Instagram is telling us. We only need to open our eyes and receive. And there's the separation, right, of receiving that news anyway through the interwebs and then bodily processing it. And I think it's been quite a transformation for you, right?
Yeah, for me, that shocking moment of watching the coup kind of unfold in such an iconic place, like in halls that I remember walking in when we took our trip to DC on our way to come here to London.
As martial scholars, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and that being surreal, you know, in my head, the memory mixing with another mediated form of seeing, which is the screen, those images kind of melding a little bit in my head, and
Mm.
like this calls for a dose of fantasy, and drag being my form of engaging with fantasy. Also, just a general year-long reaction to physical isolation and constriction,
Hmm.
being to try to find freedom by going deeper within. Um, and for me, that's like freeing myself from gender constructs and the way that has held together like a floodgate, sort of holding back the yin and the yang within myself from like interacting.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
kind of like kept my identity, held my identity together in place, whether that's the gender or the Chinese and American sides. So that night, like I think really kind of catalyzed this idea of like if some people are going to go that far, um, why should I hold back in trying to project the values I would like to see on the other side of the screen and perform fluidity and perform love, perform music, and have more conversations.
Hmm.
Um, you know,
This way. But something really powerful that you're alluding to is this idea of communicating who we are and what is our responsibility to ourselves and potentially to the people we interact with to communicate that. But what is our intent for how that's received? I mean, that's a question that I often ask myself because I think at the crux of it is there is some desire to change some hearts, open some minds that potentially hadn't experienced that before, hadn't thought of things in this way before. What is our norm is not necessarily the norm for many other people, and they're so used to viewing us potentially as objects of interest, as these things that can spice up, for lack of a better word, spice up the program, spice up
mhm.
their happenings, what's planned, and yet we're just us. We're just the complexity that it's us. We're just ourselves. How do you navigate that experience of being called other, but what is other is just always been what's you.
Embracing the others, like everyone embracing the other within them, like the part of ourselves that we are suppressing, whatever that is. Even people with a lot of privilege, we have loud and quiet parts of ourselves.
All of
Um,
us. Yep.
all of us do. There's so much we can learn from and heal from when we listen more.
Absolutely. There's always this, I think this otherness lives in everybody. That's kind of my belief with these identities. It comes out in different forms. Some of them are being talked about in society more than others, but it's there in everyone. So I think that I certainly, there's a part of me that's always trying to connect with that aspect too, even if it's in a different, seen from a different lens for that person. And that we're having this experience, okay, say I've been asked to produce something Indian in nature, or whatever that means, whatever that entity means. But I make that product, and I make that process, that experience, and then, it's resonating in completely different places and areas where someone might not have expected it to. So that for me is the transformation for myself and for the people I'm working with or experiencing this with. Absolutely. I did a project with an ensemble that was kind of about exploring our identities, which is, to be honest, kind of every project that I do. It's
Yeah.
really important to me. I know it's really important to you. And we had this great conversation with the ensemble of figuring out what that meant to everyone. And that was super important to me, that this particular project should be felt by every person in the ensemble. And we really got to that, even if, and then that was the cool thing, people maybe on the surface of it, they might have looked like sort of the majority, and I might have looked like quote unquote a minority, but we all had so much to share from this. And that was just the most beautiful thing, to realize that, for all of us to come to that realization. I certainly learned in that process how much more we have in common. And we all have our unique experiences. That's really important, to stress the uniqueness. At the same time, you can, like you say, I love the idea of the valency that you talked about, like making those connections at those points. And they can be separate spheres or circles or whatever, but they intersect at that point. And that's really, really important to highlight too. So we had this great experience, but then when organizationally they were creating the marketing material to talk about the thing that we were putting out together, it just sort of, it said that it was from my perspective and it was from the minority perspective. And for me, that was surprising, and I think somewhat hurtful too, because surprising for the fact that I thought we'd kind of come to this point of realizing those Venn diagram overlaps. They, from their perspective, it was still that otherization, right? From their perspective, it was about the representation aspect. The representation wasn't a latent effect of what had happened. I think you used the term byproduct to describe that. So we aren't going after diversity. Like, that's not your intent or my intent to just be diverse. I don't even know what that means. We just exist. You said that it's our communication is what we're going after. It's that transformation potentially. It's that process that we are seeking, and we're seeking to curate in our work. And the other conversations, they're important. Equity conversations are important. Those happen as a result of the communication sort of successfully occurring. I am hopeful because of what you discussed about those levels of experience and making those levels available. I think that's kind of our job, and that's a really interesting challenge to take up. Just as a small example, I'm working on a piece right now that has resonances with the independence movement in India. And I'm toying with the idea of quoting a really, really significant independence song in the piece. Now, some of the performers are white, and a lot of the audiences might be white, not all of them, a lot of them. And I was thinking about this, we are people who've studied the kind of idea that cultural associations with music can be very particular, and this idea of all music sounding happy or sad is really not the truth of it. But I think I'm kind of excited by this challenge of, okay, I'm going to put in this patriotic tune, And can I convey on the level of an audience that's not familiar with it, that it has significance? But for the level that, you know, for the audience that does know this tune, that for me is going to be so emotional to quote it. I'm already, like, you know, tearing up as I'm writing it because I'm moved by that song. So, and it, you know, it talks about the promise of what could have been, and frankly, it wasn't achieved. So it's like, I'm like so moved by it if you look at the political scenario going on right now in South Asia. Um, and so I'm excited by this idea of those different tiers that you're talking about, which I think is so central to your work too.
I commend you for your bravery of stepping into this political zone, right? And because it's hard and it's charged, but it's so necessary. Like, we don't really have that luxury. I think to just to not be political, because everything is political.
Absolutely.
Politics is just power relations, and
Mm.
and power affects everything from who's elected and what policy gets passed to what instruments are thought of as familiar and
Mm.
what melodies are thought of as normal versus minority, you know, like, and as people who do these musics, like, we can't escape that. Like, we've been pushing and pulling against those boundaries our whole life. So it's like, let's lean into that. Let's have a conversation, and make music, you know, and vibe.
Which is the best part about it. And I'm so inspired by your integrity in being who you are in all the spaces that we're in. And you talked about, like, you're finding this freedom now in your soul. Like, that's so inspiring for all of us who felt kind of locked in physically by what's going on in the world. You are, like, going inward to find that, and it's expressing itself outward too, you know, and you're sharing that. You're being so gracious by sharing that with us. So thank you for that gift. I find it super inspiring.
Thank you.
I love you so much. I wish I could give you a hug,
I
but
miss you.